Well, Jeremy, first of all, thanks for your time today. I got to ask you, biggest question, might sound like a silly question, but I ask silly questions. What made you want to do this? What was your connection to this project? I mean, this state championship team of Giles, which impressive, played probably one of the greatest high school football games ever. What was your connection and what made you want to do it?
Well, my dad grew up in Giles County. He went to Narrows. He played there in the late 60s. And is that a...
No, you're fine.
Okay. Should I start over?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. Well, my dad, he played for Narrows, which is in Giles County, in the late 60s. And he played for Bob Price, which was Harry Ragsdale's successor. And so they were still running a single wing. And he told me about it when I was growing up. And you know, it's kind of fascinating. As we would go visit my grandmother, we'd pass Ragsdale Field, and as a small child, you know, he'd say, "This is where I played at." And so that was kind of an interest point for me there. But then when I started to get a little older and decided I was going to go into teaching and coaching, and you know, with coaching football, kind of learning my way and just taking an interest in different offenses and stuff, I always noticed this offense that I'd see like on the Friday night highlight shows, Giles, and I was always like, you know, that's different than what everybody else is doing. So I kind of took an interest that way. And then I was talking to my dad one day, and we kind of put together, you know, I did, that was the same offense that he had run, you know, when he was playing, and so there was a connection there, and I liked it, and I studied it a little bit, and then about 2010, which seems forever ago now, you know, I was kind of thinking about doing a project and doing something, having an English background. I thought a book might be something cool I'd like to get into and do as a side project, but you know, I didn't have the clout to write like an X's and O book on a single wing or anything like that. But you know, I said, well, I wonder if anybody's ever told the story of how it got started at Giles, because they had, you know, at that time they were coming off a couple state championship appearances in the mid 2000s. And so they were still their tradition. Coach Ragsdale had just retired, and so I contacted Jeff Williams, who was had taken the head job by then, and asked him if anybody had ever done it, and he said no. He thought it'd be a great idea, so I reached out to Coach Ragsdale and sat down with him and spent all day with him one day, and just he went through, basically just told me the whole story. But you know, I had heard bits and pieces of it from a roommate I had when I first started teaching, who told me about this great game against Allen Pinkett and Parkview Sterling, and how they, you know, they won at the very end, and just kind of all the mythology that goes along with growing up there. He went to Giles, and, you know, and so he had heard this legend and heard about all these players, and so when I heard that, I knew, you know, this was an interesting story, but it wasn't quite until I decided to go and talk to Coach Ragsdale that I was like, you know, this could be a story that I could tell. So, you know, I was still coaching at the time, continued coaching as I was working on it. Of course, we ran a single wing at Stanton River, and you know, had some success with it there. And so it was something that really kind of became part of me. It was part of what I was doing currently. It was part of this book I was writing, and really just kind of, you know, how I saw my coaching heroes, you know, and just looked up to the guys that had been at that school and built such a great program and built, you know, tradition, really. I think that's a lot of that comes through in the book, is really how they started that tradition that still, you know, rings true to this day.
What's the biggest thing you learned about that era of Giles football?
Well, it was fun interviewing all the players, and of course the coaches and stuff as well, but the players gave me a lot of aspect, kind of an inside look at what it was like growing up in Giles on the New River during that time, and how different it was from today. You know, the things that they did, you know, between practices or just for fun, it was, you know, they would cruise down to the town pool or the dine-in Pizza Hut in Parisburg, and that was what they did on, you know, for fun on the weekends, and they'd go down to the river and and hang out there, and or they'd play pinball, foosball. Those were the things that they did. Pac-Man came out in 1980, but they in Giles that wasn't going to arrive that early. So I thought that was that, and that's kind of some of the stuff that I wanted to bring to life was how do I make these characters, these people, come alive with kind of that human interest story, or show what it was like, just growing up in Giles in 1980, not just in Giles, but in 1980, and how it was different than today. And I try to use examples like there was limited television. There was you had to use some tinfoil on the rabbit ears to kind of get your picture in perfectly the way you wanted to see it. Kids drank out of a garden hose. All those kinds of classic things that you hear. I really tried to bring that nostalgia to life, and not just through their lives, but the kind of the pop culture around them. The stuff that was popular at the time. As far as just whether it be the classic muscle cars that they had and wanted to rip up and down the roads in, or just some of the music. I tried to integrate a lot of different musical selections that came from the players that were their favorite songs during that time period. So it kind of set up like a kind of a soundtrack almost as you're reading it. So that was really a big motivation of mine, was how not just the football play-by-play. That's I could get that out of a newspaper, but I wanted to bring it to life more ways than just that. I wanted it to be something that people in Giles, or everywhere really, could pick up and read, even as a casual fan. Maybe they didn't know anything about the single wing. Maybe they didn't know anything about all that much about football than what maybe they watch on TV, but they could follow it, and then they could get to know these individuals and Coach Ragsdale, and just read about an incredible true story that happened right here in Giles.
We talk about Bandana Express. Talk about that, how that got started, and where did you learn about it?
Well, it got started, and Coach Ragsdale told me this whole story, and then of course the players told me their version. When he took over, Giles was kind of a proverbial doormat. They'd been through tons of coaches. They'd only had one real winning season, their best season was 7-3. They'd had one other winning season, but essentially their history and tradition was non-existent. It was just a 1 year here or there of mediocre to better than average teams. So he knew that he had to build a tradition. He knew he had to establish something that they could all rally around. But he also had, the school was a consolidated school that kind of was still caught up in some of the old cliques of different, feeder schools, the original schools, and so there was still kind of that fractured community. They hadn't really come together as Spartans really yet. I mean, in some ways, but that was just, and that came from the AD, the principal at the time. This was a lot of people discussed that, and so that was kind of the setting when he took over, and so going into this 1979 season, which was his second season, they were getting ready to play Narrows, and he had caught wind from the players that Narrows had put a threat out towards. Leon King was their star running back. He was really kind of the face of the team. He was just a sophomore then, but he was kind of an up and comer, and he used to wear this bandana under his helmet. Started with a blue, and then as this got around to the Narrows game, made its way to red. But he'd heard about this threat towards him. They were going to take this bandana, or there was bounties on his head, and all these different things that really they didn't know what was fact and what was fiction. It was just rumors, the Celanese plant down there in Giles, and all these places where the different areas mingled, and so anyway, he had a decision to make. How was he going to address it with the team? And basically, at the end of the day, he decided, and I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but he decided to embrace Leon's bandana, which the players had all rallied around, and that really became, it spread very quickly to the school and the student body, and they all had them by the end of that week. And it was just, it was something that started then and kept growing and grew throughout the 1979 and then into 1980 season.
You know, the biggest thing from what I haven't finished reading it. I mean, it's a lot to read and it's impressive. And I love it already, and it's hard for me to even put it down, read it on the computer. But what do you feel this book will mean to everyone that was involved with the story, and then just people reading about it? Because from what you've told me before, the people that they really are embracing you putting this together.
Well, a couple things. I think that something hit me really hard a couple years ago is when one of the guys on the team passed away suddenly, and I really got to think about, all right, he's not going to get a chance to read this story, but his family will, hopefully. And I just wanted them to be able to be something that they could pick up and understand that this was a time in these guys' lives that they consider just wonderful memories. So it could be something that could be a source of joy. And can I get that stupid dog out of there?
Oh, dog's fine.
Okay, all right. So, I wanted it to be a source of joy for the people that read it, and, that in that capacity. The people that were there, that were in the community at the time, of course, a lot of people, I've had a lot of people reach out and say, I was there, I watched it, it's just a magical, I thought it was, kind of cool. One guy was like, oh, it was so magical, I just don't know how you could put it in words. How could you portray such a magical thing? And so I said, well, I did my best, and I took an incredible amount of time trying to do that. So really, and the other piece I was going to mention is that one of the things I tried to do as I was crafting this was I didn't want it to just be only about Giles or Giles and Narrows, because we're talking about Steve Ragsdale and Harry Ragsdale, and of course the rivalry with Narrows was huge at that time. And but I really wanted it to include a lot of information about the teams that they played elsewhere too, because that was there were so many great coaches that were in their prime or just getting started in that time frame. When we're talking about Bill Pattison, Dave Chris, Norm Linneberg, Phil Robbins was in the New River District at that time, Larry Bradley. Going all the way up to they played Parkview Sterling in the championship, Ed Scott. I mean, there were a lot of just really good coaches, and I kind of wanted it to be tell some of their story. I mean, I didn't want to get too far in the weeds, but I wanted it to feel like the people who lived in those communities could read it and be like, oh, that was pretty cool, or that I learned something I didn't know about my own community, or just to show some side. So I tried to at least interview either the coach or a player or two from each team that they played throughout the entire, both the games that are covered from 78 and 79, and then in the games that are covered from the 1980 season. So I was able to kind of get some information that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do. And so I thought that was, I'd hope that, say, if there's somebody in Wfxr, or there's somebody in Radford or wherever, and they see, they pick this up, they can read about the chapter that involves their team. There's history in there of that team itself, the coach, but also, I mean, some of it, we're talking about tying into Harry Ragsdale going all the way back to 1930. There's information in there on some of the teams where he had played them for the first time. The first time they played Radford in 1934, and what happened in that game. And, so just some information that maybe the people that love those teams, they could get something out of it and feel some pride in that as well.
When you look at it, I mean, and that's the neat thing, because probably if people pick it up and think, oh, we're going to hear about the 1980 Giles team, but reading about it and other things, you mentioned something that kind of stayed with me. You're talking about other errors. You're talking about the fact that, okay, the single wing has still staying power to this day at Giles. You're talking about the fact that you have all these coaches, all these characters or players and all that. I mean, not that I'm saying you wouldn't, but you took it seriously. You just wanted to make sure I dotted my I's and crossed my T's, and it just seems like reading the book, you've done it.
I appreciate it. I described this to a couple of people talking with them about the book, is I really wanted it to be a love letter to high school football in Southwest Virginia. I mean, even all the way out into the old Southwest District. I mean, there's Grundy and Graham covered in there, Abington. So it's just wanted it to really portray an area that I think that sometimes is kind of skipped over when you talk about Virginia high school football. But even that aside, just there's such a rich tradition at those schools. I mean, there's such a rich tradition just all in that area where, not only just they've had great players that's come through, but also just the communities and how they've embraced their particular team, and so that I really wanted it to be kind of something that encompasses all of Southwest Virginia, and really provide some history, about all of those schools along the way that they play. Or, there were some places where I mentioned up and coming coaches. I remember there's a couple parts where I say, there's an up and coming coach on this staff, and I name them. And they didn't really play into that story, but later on, 10, 20 years later, that person became a very successful coach themselves. I mentioned Larry Bradley. Of course, his father was a head coach. He's mentioned in the book. Then Larry at Grundy, and then his son Brad, who's coach at Heritage in Lynchburg now. Tying that whole thing together was just kind of a microcosm of how I wanted to look at it, of just being able to celebrate the traditions of those coaches, their families, the players that have come and gone. And I feel like the people that I've made contact with, or that have seen stuff I put out there on social media, have really responded. Exciting to read it. And of course, the telltale will be once they read it. I feel like it's got to be a good story. It's got to be well written, and if they like it, hopefully they tell somebody else about it, that they enjoyed it.
A couple of quick things. So if anyone's interested in buying the book, I mean, how would they do that?
You can visit my website, has all the links on it. It's up for pre-order right now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and bookshop.org. And my website is jeremyhaymore.com. And it's got all the links on there and some more background, some of the stuff that I mentioned, and as far as how I got interested in that. I tried to tell that story a little bit on the website, but those will be the primary places you could get all the links to the places that you can pre-order it. It does come out July 29th, and so I'm hoping to do some events at the local bookstores, both in the New River Valley, Roanoke area, and even here in Lynchburg, where I live in Forest. So hopefully that'll all kind of help get that word out.
How many pages is it, by the way? I lost track.
Well, the whole book is from start to finish, and you pick it up, it's 304 pages. But that is it's really only about probably 230 of the meat of the story, because at the end I've got all my end notes and stuff. That's something that our publisher felt was really important to show all the research that I had done, so that the reader could follow that, but also just to give it more credibility as far as being a true story and everything. So there's all that, bibliography, all that information at the end. That's about 40 pages probably at the end. So, but those are just that notes that help explain where those sources came from.
What's the toughest part? Let's get it.
Hot out there.
No, you're fine. Yeah, I know that. Was the toughest part just hunting everybody down? Because obviously once you got them, I mean, I'm sure they didn't deny you the interview, But was that? It seemed like that had to be the tough one because you're talking about, okay, if you started in 2010, and this was 30 years before that, and then to hunt people down. I mean, how tough and challenging was that? Because it had to be, because you don't know where all these people are 30 years later.
Yeah, it was interesting how that all came to be because Jeff Williams, when I made contact with him, he had a few because he was a freshman on that team in 1980 and came up from JV and dressed in those playoff games, and he had a few numbers of people local, some of the primary focal characters, and then as I interviewed each one of them, they had a couple of numbers of somebody else, and then then the next person had a couple of numbers of somebody else, and they were like, "Do you want to talk to all these?" Yeah, I want to talk to them all. I mean, I ended up interviewing 34 members of the 1980 Giles team alone, and I think 15 of the Parkview team, including their coaches, and so, but. It was just, there was no master list. It was all just, well, this person has a few, and then that person had another. And then there were some that were like, I hadn't talked to him in 30 years, and nobody's heard anything. And then somehow it just, all of a sudden, something turned up. His cousin or somebody played on the team and heard what I was doing, contacted me. And so I got all the starters, almost all of them, all the players, and that were on the roster itself. And but yeah, it was challenging, but that was also kind of part of the fun of like, oh man, you've got their number, let me get that, and just kind of going on to the next. And I'd call them, I'd work my way down the list, and most of them I did in person. And bulk of the research was 2010, 2011, and then some of the interviews at the end were more geared towards. Within the last 4 years, were geared towards the teams that they played and players that played on those teams. And so they played Jefferson Forest in the semifinals, which you don't really think about playing Giles, but they were AA at the time. And so right here, I was able to get with the coach who was the coach, the first coach that JF ever had. And that's only been a couple of years ago, and I talked with him. And so that was just working to the finish line and stuff like that. But yeah, it was that was part of the fun and just the excitement of it all. Of them, like you said, they were excited about it. They wanted it to be true, which I respected because they said, well, we don't want it to be like a Hollywood adaptation. We want it to be the real story. And I said, well, the great thing about this story is that it is all true, and it really happened this way. It really doesn't come down to the very end of the game against Parkview Sterling, and again, I'm not going to give any spoilers away on that, but it really happened that way, and they were excited to tell it, and what I really hoped to have happen is that all of them, including Coach Ragsdale and the other coaches, they could read it and learn something that maybe they didn't know, because the coaches might learn something that the players had done in one of their adventures, throughout the week or whatever, that maybe they didn't know about. Maybe they hadn't ever heard that. And so, I wanted it to kind of be something that all of them could see the whole picture.
That's good stuff. Movie? Is it possibly it's going to be a movie? Because it's the way it's reading, I say, gosh, this could make a good movie.
Well, I would love that. First of all, I mean that's like that's a dream of mine. That was as I wrote it. Of course, that's every author's dream, and all that. But one thing I noticed, especially now when it's getting ready to come out, there's not a whole lot of books like it out there. Those you got Friday Night Lights and some of the other ones that came out. They've been out 20, 25 years ago now, and so there's not a lot. There's still sports books, but they're geared towards other sports, or they're more like pro players' memoirs, or like biographies. But there's not really that kind of story that tells about a team in this way, because while it is nonfiction, it reads like a novel. So like you said, you think about the scenes in there like they're scenes in a movie. At least that's the way I did when I wrote it. Of course, a lot of things would have to fall into place for that to have happened. But that's. I just was really kind of taken aback of how there's not really stuff like that. I mean, there hadn't been a whole lot of like football movie. Remember the Titans is 20 plus years old now, I think. So, so you know, there's not been a whole lot of football-related movies, you know, and in the last, you know, 10 years probably. I mean, so there's not a whole lot of things that are like it out there now, and I think people like that kind of story. I think they like something that they can have hope in and escape and feel that underdog, you know, story, the classic, similar to, you know, I've tried to draw parallels between everything from Hoosiers to Rudy to obviously Friday Night Lights and Remember the Titans, but you know, just there's all those great classic sports stories that you know, I feel like it uses a lot of those same successful elements, but it's also you know, provides a unique aspect. It's in the Appalachian Mountains. It's in 1980. It's, you know, so it's a different time frame than some of those other stories. And you know, you got all that nostalgia of the 80s. People love the 80s. I mean, that's one of the things that you know, you see. I mean, I know this is kind of a stretch, but I mean, you know, even things that are popular now, like Stranger Things, you know, it's set in the 80s. People love that. They love that whole like E.T., Goonies, you know, all that kind of 80s feel. And I was like, that's what I wanted to bring to life in this.